The frost was a thief. It stole the feeling from her fingers first, then her toes. It crept up, her arms under the thin wool of her tunic, a cold that didn't just sit on her skin, but sank into her bones. Ione huddled deeper into the hollow of the ancient oak, pulling the ragged edges of her cloak tight. It did little good. The wind, sharp as a wolf's tooth, found every gap. She was an Omega. Worse, an exiled Omega. Cast out from the Blackwood pack, from the only home she had ever known, and left to survive on the fringes of the human lands. Her mother's last words had been a slap of sound in the freezing air. "Ah, you are a weakness, a flaw. Ka! Ta! Before you poison us all, poison." Ione pressed her numb fingers to her lips. The only poison she knew was the loneliness that ate at her day and night. Here, in the skeletal trees of the Whisperwood, she was nothing. A ghost, haunting the edges of a life she was never allowed to live. A sound ripped through the quiet crunch of snow under her worn boots. It wasn't the call of a bird or the snap of a twig. It was a sound of pure agony. A low, guttural roar of pain that vibrated through the frozen ground and up into her very marrow. It was the sound of a great beast, caught in a trap it could not comprehend. Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through her. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to make herself smaller than she already was. Omegas did not seek out danger. They fled from it. But the sound came again. Higher this time, a keen of metallic suffering that twisted something deep in her gut. It was a sound she understood, the sound of being caged, of being hurt and alone. She moved without thinking, her feet carrying her toward the sound against her will. The trees grew thicker here, their branches clawing at her cloak. Snow gave way to churned mud and dark frozen earth. The scent of blood and raw panicked power hit her a moment later. It was thick, coppery, and terrifyingly potent. She saw the cage first. It was a brutal thing of black iron, thick as a man's arm, half buried in the snow and mud. It looked like it had fallen from the sky. A dark star of cruelty landed in this forgotten wood, and inside it, a whirlwind of black fur and tormented muscle. It was a wolf, but no wolf she had ever seen. It was a giant, a creature of nightmare and legend. Its fur was the color of a starless midnight, its shoulders broad enough to shatter the iron bars that held it. Silver chains, thick as her wrist, were tangled around its legs, glowing with a faint, sickly blue light that seemed to burn where it touched. The beast thrashed, slamming its massive body against the bars with a deafening clang. It wasn't trying to escape. It was trying to destroy itself. Each impact drew a fresh wave of that soul-tearing agony, a roar that was half pain, half fury. Ionia's breath hitched. She should have been terrified. But beneath the fear was a current of something else. Pity. A deep, aching empathy that felt like a cord pulling her forward. Its eyes. In a moment of stillness, as the creature sagged against the bars, panting in ragged, steaming gasps, she saw its eyes. They weren't the yellow or green of a normal wolf. They were silver, like molten moonlight, and they burned with an intelligence that was utterly, terrifyingly human. They were eyes that knew despair. She took a hesitant step closer. The beast's head snapped up, a low growl rumbling in its chest like an earthquake. Its lips peeled back from teeth that were daggers of ivory. The message was clear. Stay away. Ione stopped, her heart hammering against her ribs. She couldn't help this creature. She couldn't even help herself. She was just a cast-off, a broken thing. But the image of those silver eyes wouldn't leave her. The loneliness in them was a mirror to her own. Without knowing why, she began to hum. It was an old melody, one her grandmother had sung to her as a child, a simple, wordless tune meant to soothe fevers and quiet nightmares. Her voice was small at first, a trembling thread of sound in the vast, hostile silence of the woods. The wolf stilled, its head tilted, one ear swiveling toward her. The growl died in its throat, replaced by a low, questioning whine. Emboldened, Ione put words to the tune. Simple words, soft words. Hush now, quiet now. The dark is deep, but you are not alone. Let the pain sleep. Let it sleep. She sang of quiet streams and sun-drenched clearings. She sang of the warmth of a den and the companionship of a pack. She sang of everything she had lost. Everything. This magnificent, trapped creature had clearly lost too. Her voice grew stronger, clearer, weaving a blanket of sound to wrap around its pain. The effect was immediate and profound. The tension bled from the preacher's massive frame. Its head lowered, its great body sinking to the floor of the cage until it was lying on its side, panting softly. The silver eyes never left her, but the frantic torment was gone, replaced by a weary, watchful intelligence. The blue glow of the chains seemed to dim, the magic in them soothed by her song. She crept closer, her song never faltering. She reached the cage, her small, frost-bitten hand resting on the cold iron, just inches from its massive head. The scent of pine and winter and a deep, masculine musk filled her senses. Overwhelming the smell of blood, the wolf closed its eyes, a soft sigh escaping its lungs. It was a sigh of surrender, not to the cage, but to her. She stayed there for what felt like hours, her voice growing hoarse, her body trembling with cold and exhaustion. She sang until the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the snow in shades of rose and violet. She sang until she had nothing left to give. As her voice finally faded into a whisper, a change began, a shimmer in the air around the wolf. The black fur seemed to recede, the massive form contracting. Bones shifted with soft grating sounds. The snout shortened, the ears pulled back. It was a transformation, but slow, agonizing, as if the man were fighting his way out of the beast through sheer, exhausted will. Ione watched, frozen, her hand still on the cage. This was not a normal wolf. This was a shifter, a powerful one. Where the giant wolf had been, a man now lay curled on the frozen floor of the cage. He was naked, his body a tapestry of muscle and scars. The silver chains were still wrapped around his limbs, but they now lay against pale human skin. His hair was as black as the wolf's fur, long and matted with sweat and blood. He pushed himself up slowly, his movements stiff with pain. He sat with his back against the bars, his head bowed, breathing heavily. The sheer scale of him was breathtaking. He was a king, even in this degraded state, a fallen god in an iron prison. Then he lifted his head, and Ione's world stopped. She knew that face. Every wolf in every pack knew that face. It was stamped on coins, carved into stone in every pack hall. The sharp jaw, the high cheekbones, the stern, unyielding mouth, the eyes, even weary and shadowed with pain, were the same molten silver she had seen in the wolf garden. The Alpha King, the ruler of all the territories, a man spoken of in whispers, a being of immense terrifying power, who had ruled alone for centuries, and he was in a cage. The injured beast she had been soothing was not just a beast. It was him. He was in the cage, too. Her mind reeled. The Alpha King, trapped and wounded in her forgotten corner of the woods. It was impossible. He was a force of nature, not a man who could be caged. "You," he rasped. His voice was a ruin, gravel, and broken glass, but it held a core of absolute authority. His silver eyes fixed on her, not with the wildness of the wolf, but with a sharp, piercing focus. "Your voice." Ida quieted the storm. Ione couldn't speak. She could only stare, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She, Ione, the Omega, cast-off, had sung the Alpha King to sleep. "Who are you?" he asked, his gaze unwavering. "No one," she whispered, the word barely audible. It was the truest thing she could say. A flicker of something, annoyance maybe, or just weariness, crossed his face. "Everyone is someone." He tried to shift, and a hiss of pain escaped his lips as the silver chains bit into his skin, flaring with that sickly blue light. The magic that held him was still active. Compassion warred with terror in Ioniath's chest. He was the king, but he was also a man in agony. The caretaker in her, the part that had responded to the Wolfa's pain, won out. "The chains," she said, finding her voice. "They seem to be a feeding on your power." His eyes narrowed. "You can see the magic," she nodded numbly. "It's a blue and cold." He looked at her, then truly looked at her, and a new expression entered his eyes. Curiosity. No one has been able to see the chain's aura in 100 years. He fell silent, studying her as if she were a puzzle he was trying to solve. The intensity of his gaze was a physical weight. "Why are you here?" she finally dared to ask. "Your Majesty." The title felt strange and clumsy on her tongue. A humorless smile touched his lips. "An excellent question. One I have been asking myself." He gestured vaguely with his chained hand. "My power has become as unstable, a flaw in the bloodline. It rises like a tide, and I lose myself to the beast. The cold you see in the change-it is a reflection of the cold that now lives in me. My own council, in their wisdom, decided a period of a containment was necessary. Betrayal. He had been betrayed by his own people, caged like an animal because they feared the power that made him their king. The story was a punch to her gut. It was her own story, written on a grander, more terrible scale. "They left you here to die," she whispered, the horror of it dawning on her. "They left me here to burn out," he corrected, his voice flat. "There is a difference. One is murder, the other is a policy." He leaned his head back against the bars, the fight seeming to go out of him. "But the end result is the same." Ione looked at the massive lock on the cage door. It was a complex thing of gears and wards, glowing with the same blue energy as the chains. She couldn't break it, she couldn't fight his counsel, she couldn't do anything, but she could stay. She slid down to sit in the snow, mirroring his position on the other side of the bars. "I won't leave you." He opened his eyes, a flicker of surprise in their silver depths. "You should. When the sun sets completely, the beast will return. I won't be able to control it. I could hurt you." "You won't," she said, with a certainty she didn't feel. "I'll sing." And so began their strange vigil. As dusk deepened into a cold, star-dusted night, she sang. When she felt the power begin to build in him, a restless, dangerous energy that made the air crackle, she sang her softest melodies. She told him stories of the village, of the baker's fat cat, and the little girl who made crowns of daisies. She filled the terrifying silence with the small, fragile sounds of her own insignificant life, and he listened. In between the waves of his pain, he spoke. He told her of his own prison, not the iron one, but the one made of duty and centuries of loneliness. He was the Alpha King, but he was utterly alone, his power a barrier that kept everyone at a distance. He hadn't had a real conversation, one not steeped in protocol and fear, in over a century. She learned that the cold consuming him was a side effect of his immense power, a sort of magical frostbite that was slowly freezing him from the inside out. The bond with his wolf, once a source of strength, was now a battle for control he was slowly losing. "My ancestors called it the King's Winter," he murmured, his voice low and rough. "It takes us all in the end, a throne of ice." She in turn told him of her exile, of the shame of being an omega, the constant feeling of being less, of being a mistake. She spoke of her mother's cold eyes, and the finality of her banishment. She had never spoken of these things to anyone. "You are not a mistake," he said, his voice fierce, cutting through her litany of self-doubt. He reached a hand through the bars, his fingers stopping just short of her face. "To bear such pain, and still have a song in your heart, that is not weakness. That is a strength I have not seen in 1,000 years." His words were a balm on wounds she hadn't known were still bleeding. In the light of the moon, in this cage of despair, she felt seen for the first time in her life. A rapid, terrifying intimacy bloomed between them, fragile and fierce. It was a connection forged in shared brokenness. For 3 days and 3 nights, she tended to him. She brought him water from a nearby stream in a cup made of leaves. She found winter berries and tough roots for him to eat, pushing them through the bars. It was a pathetic offering for a king, but he ate every bite with a quiet gratitude that made her chest ache. During the day, he was Cardan, the weary, broken king. At night, when the transformation threatened to overwhelm him, she would sing, her voice the only anchor he had against the tide of the beast. The great wolf would settle at her song, its massive head resting near her hand, a low rumble of contentment in its chest. She was no longer afraid of it. She understood that the beast and the man were two halves of a single suffering soul. On the fourth morning, everything changed. The sound of hoofbeats and shouting men shattered the peace of their small world. A dozen riders, clad in the silver and black of the king's guard, burst into the clearing. They were led by a grim-faced wolf with a scar that split his left eyebrow. "Your Majesty," the scarred wolf, his general breathed, dismounting and dropping to one knee. Relief and horror warred on his face. "We found you. The Councilla, they will pay for this." Cardan didn't look at them. His silver eyes were locked on Ione. The world was crashing in. Their time was over. The look on his face was one of profound loss. "Open the cage, Bram," Cardan commanded, his voice once again holding the iron of a king. The guards moved with frantic efficiency, using a series of keys and incantations to disable the lock and the chains. The moment the last chain fell away, Cardan was moving, but he didn't rise in fury. He simply walked to the cage door and stepped out, his powerful body moving with a fluid grace that belied his ordeal. The guards offered him cloaks, weapons, their allegiance. He ignored them all. He walked straight to Ione, who was frozen in place, a small, ragged figure in the snow. He knelt before her, taking her small, cold hands in his large, warm ones. The entire King's Guard watched in stunned silence. The Alpha King, naked and scarred, kneeling to an unknown Omega. "I have to go," he said, his voice soft, for her ears only. "My kingdom is tearing itself apart. The counselors who did this must answer for it." She nodded, unable to speak, past the lump in her throat. Of course, he had to go. He was the king. She was a nothing. This was always how it was going to end. "Wait for me," he said, his gaze intense, imploring. "Do not leave this place. I will come back for you. I swear it, on my crown, on my life. I'll take this one." The words were a brand, a promise, but it felt like a dream she was about to wake up from. He stood, and in one swift movement, he was dressed in the cloaks his men provided. He was a king again. The distance between them was no longer just a few feet of snow, but a chasm of status and power. He mounted a horse, gave a series of sharp commands, and the clearing was filled with the chaos of departure. He looked back only once. His silver eyes found hers across the clearing, and for a moment, he was not the king. He was just the man from the cage. Then he turned, and they were gone, leaving behind only churned snow and the deafening silence. Ione stood there until the cold seeped back into her bones. He had said to wait. He had sworn to return. She waited. Days turned into a week. A week turned into a month. The snows began to melt, and the first green shoots of spring pushed through the thawing earth. Ione remained in her small corner of the Whisperwood, clinging to his promise like a dying woman clings to a single drop of water. News trickled out to the village, carried by merchants and traveling patrols. The Alpha King had returned. The treacherous council members had been arrested. There was talk of a civil war, of factions, loyal to the old council rising up in the north. The kingdom was on a knife's edge. She heard whispers of the king's affliction. They called it the king's winter. Just as he had, they said it was worsening, that his temper was like a blizzard, his touch like ice. Rumors spread that the brief connection he had forged with a mysterious healer in the woods had accelerated his decline, that loving R, even caring A, was a poison to his bloodline. Loving her was killing him. The threat was real. The hope she had given him was now a weapon turned against him. Her heart ached with a new kind of pain. She had wanted to heal him, but she had only made it worse. Her presence in his life was a danger to him. Meanwhile, her own past was stirring. Her mother, having heard whispers of an Omega with a strange power over beasts, a power linked to the king himself, had become interested. It was a threat Ione had never anticipated. One day, a patrol from her old pack, the Blackwood Pack, arrived at the edge of the woods. They weren't there to welcome her home. They were there to hunt her. She was no longer just an exile. She was a liability. She suffered. The loneliness was a physical weight, heavier, now that she knew what it was to not be alone. Every rustle of leaves sounded like his return. Every wolf's howl was a question. Where is he? The hope he had lit in her was guttering, threatening to go out, leaving her in a darkness deeper than before. In the capital, Carden suffered. He sat on his throne of carved stone and felt the ice spreading in his veins. The memory of Ionia's voice was the only warmth left in him, but it was a phantom warmth. Every thought of her, every pang of longing, seemed to fuel the storm inside him. His wolf paced the cage of his mind, snarling, wanting to run back to the woods, back to the only one who could soothe it. But his kingdom was crumbling. He was forced to make brutal choices, to be the cold, merciless king his enemies expected, all while the memory of a gentle Omega was tearing him apart. He was trapped again, this time in a cage of his own making. The two realities were destined to collide. The attack came at dawn. Ione was gathering herbs when the scent of her old pack hit her raw wave of aggression and grim purpose. They weren't trying to be stealthy, they were hurting her. She ran, her heart pounding, but they were wolves, and she was on foot. They cornered her in the clearing, the one with the empty cage still sitting like a dark scar on the land. And leading them, her face, a mask of cold resolve, was her mother. Ione, her mother said, her voice devoid of any warmth. You have made a terrible mistake. Let me go, Ione pleaded, backing away until her shoulders hit the cold iron of the cage. I cannot, her mother replied. That song of yours, it is not a gift, it is a curse. The women of our line carry it, it attracts power, and it destroys the men it touches. I saw it happen to your father. He was drawn to my song, and it amplified the rage in him until it consumed him. I will not let you make the same mistake with the king. So that was it. Not hatred, fear. A twisted, suffocating love that chose exile over a perceived danger. Her mother wasn't a monster. She was a mirror of Ione's own fears, magnified over a lifetime of grief. I banished you to save you, her mother said, her voice cracking for the first time, to keep you from this fate. But you found him, or he found you. It doesn't matter. The bond has begun. I can feel it. It is already poisoning him. Before Ione could process this, her mother raised a hand. I am sorry, my daughter. There is only one way to break a blood bond. The warriors of the Blackwood Pack raised their spears. They were going to kill her, to save the king. A roar of fury that was not entirely human split the air. It came, not from the pack, but from the trees. A blur of silver and black erupted from the woods. A dozen of the king's personal guard, with Bram at their lead. And at their center, on a massive black warhorse, was Carden. He wasn't the broken man from the cage. He was the Alpha King in his full, terrifying glory. His silver eyes were burning with a cold fire, and frost seemed to crystallize in the air around him. He had come. He had kept his promise. Stand down. Cardenaw's voice was low, but it cracked, like a glacier. He dismounted, his gaze sweeping over the scene, taking in the spears pointed at Ione, the cage, the woman who led the pack. His eyes locked on Ione, and for a second, the icy fury was tempered by raw, desperate relief. Your Majesty, Ione's mother said, bowing her head, though her posture was defiant. We are handling a private pack matter. She is not your pack, Carden stated, walking forward until he stood between Ione and the spears. He put himself in front of her, a living shield. She is mine. The declaration hung in the air, an act of war and a vow of love all in one. Then you are a fool, her mother spat. Our bloodline is a poison to yours. Her love will be your death. It will feed the winter in your soul until there is nothing left of you. As if to prove her point, a tremor went through Carden. He gritted his teeth, a sheen of frost appearing on his skin. The love he felt, the protective fury, it was fuel for his curse. He was literally freezing, from the inside out, the king's winter consuming him as he stood there. I know, Carden rasped, his voice tight with pain. He turned his head slightly, his silver eyes finding Ionia's. They were filled with agony, but also with an unwavering certainty. It is a price I am willing to pay. He looked back at her mother. But I will not let you harm her. Then you will die, her mother said, a tear finally tracing a path down her cheek. And she will be the one who killed you. She gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod. The Blackwood wolves attacked. The clearing exploded into chaos. The king's guard met the charge, steel clashing, wolves snarling. It was a brutal, desperate fight. Carden was a whirlwind of destruction. But every blow he landed, every surge of his alpha power, took its toll. The frost on his skin spread, his movements growing stiffer. He was fighting a war on two fronts, one against the Blackwood pack and one against himself. Ione watched in horror, useless, pressed against the cage. Her mother's words echoed in her ears. She will be the one who killed you. Bram, his general, fought at Carden's side, deflecting a spear meant for the king's back. My king, you must stop. Your power will consume you. I cannot lose her again, Bram. Carden growled, his voice thick with the ice forming in his lungs. He was faltering. He stumbled, falling to one knee, his body encased in a visible aura of shimmering cold. Her mother watched with a terrible vindicated grief. And in that moment, something inside Ione broke. Not with a snap, but with a great, shuddering release. She looked at her mother, not with hatred, but with a sudden, piercing understanding. She saw the terrified woman who had lost a mate to a similar rage, a woman who had made a terrible choice out of a twisted, broken love. She had tried to cage her daughter to protect her, just as Carden's counsel had caged him. It was all the same cage. She had to forgive her, not for her mother's sake, for his. I forgive you, Ione whispered. The words aimed at her mother, but felt deep in her own soul. The rage she had carried for years, the bitterness of her exile, it all just dissolved. And in the space it left behind, something new, something vast and ancient, awoke. It was her song, but not the small, timid thing it had been. This was a force of nature. She stepped away from the cage, walking into the heart of the battle. The fighting wolves seemed to part before her, sensing a power greater than their alpha rage. She walked until she stood before the kneeling, freezing king. She placed her hands on his chest, over his heart. The cold was shocking. A physical blow that should have frozen her solid. But beneath the ice, she could feel the faint, stubborn flicker of his life. She opened her mouth and sang. It was not a song of soothing. It was a song of command, a song of life, a song of pure, unadulterated power. Light poured from her, a golden warmth that pushed back the unnatural cold. The very ground seemed to hum with her. The trees, the air, the wild spirits of the wood. Her power wasn't just calming beasts. It was commanding the very life force around her, a deep communion with the soul of the world. The wolves, from both her pack and his, stopped fighting. They lowered their heads, whining softly, their battle rage soothed and swept away by the sheer force of her will. The beasts obeyed her, all of them. The frost on Cardna's skin sizzled and evaporated. The ice in his veins didn't just melt, it was transformed. The raw, chaotic energy of the king's winter, which had been killing him, was now being woven into something new by her song. Her power wasn't nullifying his, it was harmonizing with it. The cold found its balance in her warmth, the beast within him found its peace in her call. He gasped, a deep, shuddering breath, the first easy breath he'd taken in months. The silver of his eyes was no longer burning with cold fire, but shone with a clear, brilliant light. He looked up at her, his face filled with awe and a love so profound it was humbling. Ione! He breathed her name like a prayer. Her song softened, the power receding into a gentle golden glow that enveloped them both. The battle was over. Her mother stared, her face streaked with tears, watching the miracle she had spent a lifetime trying to prevent. She had been wrong. Ione's power wasn't a curse. It was the cure. Cardan rose to his feet. His strength returned, his power settled and calm for the first time in his life. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, and to him, she was. "I love you," he murmured into her hair, and this time, the words didn't hurt him. They healed him. "I'm saying that I love you, and it's going to save me." She leaned back, looking up into his face. "I know," she whispered, a smile finally reaching her eyes. "It saved me too." In the quiet aftermath, there were no more battles to be fought. Ione's mother, broken and humbled, relinquished her command of the Blackwood Pack, accepting exile in a remote northern convent, a mercy Ione insisted upon. The king's guard and the Blackwood warriors, now leaderless and freed from their battle rage by Ione's song, simply waited for the command of their new queen. Cardan took her hand, his touch warm and steady. "Come home," he said, "with me." It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. A place had been waiting for her all along. Months later, the throne room was filled with sunlight. The great stone hall, once known for its chilling drafts and the cold aura of its king, was now a place of warmth and life. Green vines, coaxed into bloom by a queen with a song in her soul, curled around the pillars. Wolves of all ranks mingled. The old tensions between packs dissolved into a new, stronger unity under an alpha king and queen who were two halves of a whole. Ione stood on the dais beside Cardan, not behind him. His hand rested on the small of her back, a constant, reassuring pressure. She was no longer the exiled Omega. She was Ione, the singer-queen, whose power had brought balance to the king's winter and peace to the territories. She looked out at the faces in the court. She saw Bram, his scarred face relaxed in a genuine smile. She saw warriors from her old pack, now sworn to her, their gazes full of respect. She had found her place, not by fighting for it, but by embracing the part of herself she had been taught to hate. Cardan leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. "What are you thinking about?" His voice was a low rumble, for her alone. "The cage," she admitted softly. "I was just thinking about that iron cage in the woods." He turned her to face him, his silver eyes soft. "I think of it too," he confessed. "It was the first place I ever felt free." He was right. They had both been in a cage, he in a prison of power and ice, she in a prison of worthlessness and exile. And in that broken, desperate place, they had found the key to each other's locks. She reached up her hand, cupping his jaw, feeling the warmth of his skin. "No more cages," she promised. "No more cages," he agreed, and he sealed the promise with a kiss. A kiss that tasted of spring after a long winter, of a home finally found. The king and his queen were whole, their song just beginning.